So I'm Greg Slezak. I'm the zone planning forester. I'm the Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest.
Hey everybody, I'm Ryan Foote. I'm the district ranger on the Chattahoochee cut. My name's Ryan Foote. I'm the district ranger on the Chattooga River Ranger District.
My name is Michael Starbuck. I'm a silv forester on the Chattooga Ranger cut.
So, yeah.
Same district. Also graduated Warnell 2 years ago, so I can definitely relate.
Good. So Ryan, tell us about this district and your responsibilities, and then we'll talk about some other issues that you and your staff face here.
Yeah. So the Chattooga River Ranger District. It's a fairly large size ranger district, approximately 200,000 acres in size in the northeast corner of Georgia. We consider it an urban forest. This is, we're 2 hours away from over 8 million people and growing. And so this is a highly visited forest and ranger district. Provides a lot of recreational opportunities, from whitewater rafting on the Chattooga, hiking on the Appalachian Trail, backcountry adventures, developed campgrounds. We have a total of 14 developed campgrounds here on the district, and we're currently in the Sarah's Creek campground at this point. And we also have an active forest management program, and we are really trying to get our hands on improving forest health through forest restoration activities, whether that's through timber sales, fuels management, prescribed fire, etc. It runs the gamut. And so we're an integrated district with a lot of responsibilities. And my job is, as the district ranger, I'm, I guess, in charge of all of this ranger district. As part of the forest leadership team over the entire Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest. And so my role is to oversee and manage the silviculture and timber programs, what these fellows are in, wildlife and fisheries, archaeology, recreation, business administration, fire, fuels, helicopters, and so it runs the gamut of those. And so it's a big job, and my job is to rely on my staff to provide me good information on what's going on out there in the woods, what do the public need, especially in recreation, and providing me with good ideas and concepts and projects to not only improve forest health and the ecosystem, but then providing a safe and enjoyable recreational experience, because recreation use is the term exploding is maybe a little dramatic, but it is growing exponentially in my experience over the last 3 years.
Yeah, you said there are 8 million people just 2 hours away from Metro Atlanta and Atlanta region. I can imagine. Have you seen, what kind of data have you seen in terms of visitor use since you've been here?
Yeah, so a lot of it is anecdotal data.
Okay.
Our monitoring of use. So we don't know when people come into the forest. There isn't a check station.
But they have fee stations. But
the fee stations are, and so at our campgrounds and trailheads, what we've seen is, especially at our trailheads, our developed trailheads where there are fees associated, that gives us a really good idea of how many people are using those. And what we've seen in our trailheads for day hiking, some backpacking, that are easily accessible right off the highway, near the towns of Clayton and Helen, Georgia. Those areas, even during the time of COVID, we've seen huge increases in the amount of people coming to the forest during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we're seeing, I'm hesitant to put a number on it yet because we're still kind of crunching those numbers. But there's I'm not exaggerating when I say a 20% increase from 2017 to 2020 in our day use hiking. And we're seeing some of the same data at our campgrounds as well. Full utilization of all of our campgrounds. And so we're seeing more people. And what's really cool is we're seeing a whole different kind of, I think, segment of the population who never came to the forest. COVID-19 has exposed the national forest to what we provide. People are looking for that isolation. People are looking to social distance, and unfortunately, in my opinion, social media and Instagram brings everybody to the same places.
Right. Well, they were talking about this at DNR, that all of a sudden they are busier than they ever have been lately, and they're trying to protect the public at the same time. And you can't begin to do that here. You just rely on sensibilities, right? That do the right thing. And
there's a large part of that we do everything we can to provide a safe recreating environment.
Sure.
But there are inherent risks to the public and us as employees every time we get outside of our vehicle. From falling snags,
right,
to venomous snakes, to holes in the ground, slips, trips, and falls. And another large area where we see a lot of injuries and unfortunately fatalities are waterfalls. Waterfalls tend to be some of our most dangerous and most common areas where people get hurt.
Yeah. So you're a trained fisheries biologist, and yet you have to be a master of all trades as well now.
Yeah.
Let's hear from some of your staff about their backgrounds and what do they do.
Yeah, so my position here is the planning forester. My background, I went to Paul Smith College for ecosystem forest management. And I've had a background of doing rec management, vegetation, road construction, the whole gamut. So my main role in this position is to inform the FLT and the ranger of what needs to happen on the ground. So for instance, the Sayers Creek watershed is one of these watersheds that has a large need for the ecosystem management. We have non-native invasive species. We are treating for hemlock, woolly adelgid. We're treating about 30,000 trees on the Chattahoochee. We are also doing veg projects, mainly related to restoration of forest communities. And with that gamut, nothing in veg happens without coordination between every other program. And, recreation management falls into that. In fact, one of the areas that we're recently going to be starting up a project will be right here in the Sayers Creek campground, doing some non-native basic work.
You also have responsibility for a lot of other things. People management, I'm sure, too, right? In a way, indirectly.
Yeah, absolutely. So that goes on two levels. So I'm also a supervisory forester. So I have two direct supervision, to a forester and a technician, and I also have 3 other staff on the other district. And then also with that, everything we do, the public is involved. We are a collaborative agency, multiple use. So we are dealing with public, environmental groups, local communities, government officials. It's a whole gamut. And recreation, I have worked in private, state, and federal, and recreation has been one of the major parts of every position I've ever had.
Interesting. So you said the word multiple use. What's that mean? How do you learn to be a manager of multiple uses?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when Pinchot wrote, the Forest Service up, this was a whole new concept. Nobody had ever thought of a multiple use agency, and the idea of multiple use has changed through the 115-year history of the Forest Service. But in a nutshell, it's managing for everything. It's not an emphasis on timber. It's not an emphasis on recreation. It's pulling it all together and doing a true ecosystem management. Um, the main thing that separates the Forest Service from other land management agencies is we're conservation instead of preservation. And we're also the largest land manager agency in the world with 193 million acres across the world. We have research stations all over the place. So really the Forest Service is tying in all the different programs, and how it's designed is each different specialty has a program manager that is their main focus. And then generally the planning forester / silviculturalist is the person that kind of works with all the programs to pull that together and produce a project. And how the Forest Service since the late 1990s has operated is under ecosystem management forest plans, and they're focused on watershed restoration. So like as I said, the Sayers Creek watershed is where we are right now, and one of the big highlights in the forest plan and subsequent NEPA projects has been the non-native invasive species that are prevalent in this watershed.
What are some of the primary species that you're trying to control here?
So the primary species is kudzu, honeysuckle, autumn olive, mimosa, and bittersweet. So we have a whole gamut of invasives out here.
And how do you do it?
So we do it through a variety of ways. So our first priority is we try to do it through cultural ways. So that's through fire management. And then we try to follow it up with a mechanical treatment. So either hand pulling it out or using equipment. And then our last option is usually a chemical treatment to help manage that. And with invasive species, with restoration management, and with any watershed project, it's long term. Nothing is a one-shot and done project. As we sit here in this campground, we're surrounded by hemlock trees that have been treated since 2005 from the invasive hemlock woolly adelgid. The program spans the whole 750,000 acres of the Chattahoochee, and it's been a collaborative effort between the state, Save Georgia Hemlocks, and a multitude of colleges and partner groups, including UGA. And it's an ongoing project. We're 15 years into it. We've treated 30,000 trees about 3 times now. And we also are releasing a biological control through UGA and Clemson across the forest to hopefully one day be able to reduce the amount of imidacloprid, which is the chemical we're using to manage the tree right now, and it will be managed.
Looks like we see one right behind you tagged. I'm not
A
sure
small
if that's
one.
when it's been treated or not, but
Yeah, so each campground is one of the project areas where we treated these hemlocks, and the volunteer groups or the Forest Service or contractors tag each tree, and they record what they did, how many trees, and it's essentially on a rotation. So every 5 to 7 years we return to all these areas and retreat. So it's a huge project and a huge collaboration.
Yeah, and that's with that and is the hemlocks. They tend to like these riparian corridors like this.
Yep.
And when you look at where the public wants to recreate, where is it? It's in the creeks. It's next to the rivers. They want to camp near water, just as I do. And with the issue with the hemlock woolly adelgid, a result of that is it kills the trees, and that creates snags and falling trees. And going back, you're mentioning how do you protect everyone? And it's quite often that we'll find people setting up their tent or their camper underneath a snag, and it's sometimes just looking up. It's so easy to get focused on the ground, and so that's why we've really tried to focus that in our campgrounds and try to preserve these large hemlocks because they're disappearing, not just in this area but throughout their whole range.
And hemlock has a huge intrinsic value. So I come from originally the Adirondack Mountains, where hemlock is a huge part of the ecosystem.
Yep.
And most campgrounds are hemlock coves. And when this insect started coming in, well, all your campgrounds are becoming snag forests. And the public wants to see something happen. And it's a complex issue because we can't manage in one day to return hemlock, and we can't even manage to eliminate the hemlock wood adelgid. But we have to somehow forge that into an ecosystem management objective, and we also have to tie in the recreation and public values of this tree species.
And that requires some silvicultural practices and treatments, right? And Mike, you're a graduate of the Warren School, forester,
Thank you.
and tell us what your job is to making actions happen here on.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of like to think of it as my job involves like a lot of field work. So not to say that these guys aren't in the field, but I kind of take what the masterminds come up with, and they come up with some of these ideas using some of my feedback and opinions too. But
How great
I mean, these guys come up with the real projects,
Yeah.
and I'm the one out on the field kind of implementing what it is we're trying to do. So, for example, currently I'm out on the Lake Russell WMA, and I'm taking inventory plots because we're planning a project out there for coneflower restoration, which is an endangered species that we're trying to restore.
Mhm.
And so I'm going out there and seeing what's out there, tree species, heights, diameters. It's not a straight cruise where I'm trying to get exact numbers to know what the value is,
Right.
but I'm getting a lot of information, and Greg's taking a lot of that information and kind of, we have a great software called Survey 123 that does a lot of statistics for you, and you can get a great idea of what's out there
Mhm.
before you decide, where it is we're going to do some work for this coneflower restoration project.
Okay.
So I get to do a lot of walking in the woods, and I love it.
Yeah.
So, and to put it in perspective from a student's perspective, I mean, I came into the Forest Service not but a few years before, having no idea that I was going to get into the Forest Service. I was a music ed major, and then I just did a lot of hiking during this time frame where I was a culinary industry employee, and I was like, I'm just going to go into forestry and see what happens. Granted, I thought I was going to be a wildlife major when I was a forestry major, so once I took series course, I was like, what is this? What is he talking about? All of the, I didn't know anything about timber, basically, is what I'm saying. So you can come a long way really quickly, and one place to do that really well is in the Forest Service because of all the opportunities you have to be integrated, like Ryan was saying.
What do you think drove you had that desire to be outside? Was that what drove you from music ed to natural resource management
Yeah, it was
career?
hiking. Honestly, it was just hiking a lot
Yeah.
in a time period where I wasn't going to school and I was just working full time.
Mhm.
It just, something drew me. I mean, as a kid, my dad, we went hiking, camping, all that, but
Yeah.
it just drew me to it. So I decided, I was originally at Kennesaw and I wanted geography, and I was like, well, I heard about this awesome program at UGA. Let's see if I can get in. And
Mhm.
so yeah, I highly recommend everybody. I mean, finish your course in Warnell, and the Forest Service was a great option for me. So I think it's a great option for a lot of people.
Mhm. Did you have any volunteer experience with the Forest Service prior, or other experiences that you think helped get your position in starting in at the bottom of the rung of the ladder and working yourself?
Not a lot of volunteerism, to be honest.
Okay.
I did a little bit of volunteering at an animal shelter. I have an affinity for animals. I just love wildlife. So, I mean, I'm not a huge hunter, but when I'm out here, I'm trying to see every little thing I can. I mean, like, lately I've been having hummingbirds visit me every day because I wear bright orange. And I love that. Like, just the
That's
little things that
amazing.
come and visit you, all the wildlife that's out there.
Yeah.
That's what drew me in, was the wildlife. I'm a huge snakes guy. I love herps. So, yeah, I mean, I'm always trying to, like, we were at the Raven campground and Ryan was turning over every log and rock trying to find the snakes. And some people are like, what are you doing, man? And I'm like, yes.
So,
But
from a standpoint of our students needing to understand what to do to get themselves into a career, how would you describe? Did you have herpetology at Warnell? Did you take any of those other classes? You're a forestry major, but did you take any
No.
classes that helped, or
Most
is
of
it
my
just
classes were forestry oriented. I chose a couple electives, like environmental interpretation with Dr. Green was a great class. But when it comes down to it, it was just a matter of the clubs were huge. I mean, that was how I got to meet our recruiter Sylvia. Was through clubs. Was through, I mean, go to Flincham's Phoenix, go to the roundtable events. That's obviously big. I mean, I think all the teachers already preach that anyways, but that was big for me, meeting somebody from the Forest Service that was super cool, and she was just really easy to talk to. And I met her again at another event, and she kind of plugged the Forest Service idea in my mind. And once I got into the Forest Service, it was all the opportunity. You know, I'm not trying to down talk somebody like IP, but I have a buddy that works for IP, and his job is pretty, you know, like cut and dry. He does the same stuff over and over again. And I like to think most forests in the country kind of have opportunities to do a lot. That it's not the same on every district, but here, I mean, I've been doing rec, wildlife, timber, everything. I've been working for everybody since I've been here, and it's been great. I've been doing botanical surveys for wildlife. I got my chainsaw certification and been cutting hazard trees in campgrounds like Raven Beach Campground. And then, of course, I've been doing all the cruising and stuff for the Sylv shop. So if you want to broaden your horizons in terms of not just sticking to one program, being rec, timber, wildlife, I think Forest Service is perfect for that balance.
So we heard a little bit, a couple yesterday from the DNR about mobility in terms of career trajectory. What is y'all's background in terms of what that looks like with your GS status and moving through the Forest Service and from here to there? If someone speak to that.
Yeah, so I can start. So I'm pretty non-traditional in terms of the Forest Service path. So I wanted to be a forester since I was 4 years old. I had rubber boots on backwards. I wanted to work, be a forester. I wanted to work for the Forest Service since I was like 10. I ended up getting a degree in forest management, and I've been obsessed with ecosystem management since I was like 12 years old. Just love it. So I ended up getting hired.
I couldn't even pronounce ecosystem when I was
Yeah, you know, everyone's saying,
an
what are you
overachiever.
talking about?
I'm glad he works for you, Ryan.
Me too.
Thanks to the spotted owl out west, probably introduced a lot of us to ecosystem management.
Yeah, so
That's awesome.
I worked at a tree farm, and I ended up getting a summer position out in Idaho on the Piatt National Forest. Super excited to work for the Forest Service. When I graduated, I ended up getting a full-time job with Lime Adirondack Forest Company. They managed 270,000 acres in the Adirondack Park under an integrated forest plan. It worked highly with the other programs and state partners and the Nature Conservancy. But I still really wanted to get the Forest Service. So I ended up, I was applying to the Forest Service and I couldn't quite get the position. So I ended up taking a job with Wisconsin DNR as their senior forester up on the Flambeau River State Forest in North Wisconsin. And there I acted mainly as a rec manager and a forester. We had a ecosystem management plan, and then I was hired in National Forest of Mississippi as a GS9 prescriptionist forester. While I was there, I had a really diverse job. I was doing the rec management, so we had a high rec program on the forest. And I was also doing a lot of the GIS work, and I was also, you know, evaluating stands for restoration needs. And then this past year, Ryan hired me on as their zoned silviculturalist / planting forester. And you know, my job is extremely diverse, and I tell everyone who's going into forestry, it's not just the tree project. You manage in recreation, you manage fire, you manage roads, you manage streams, you're working with wildlife biologists. My brother right now is getting his master's in wildlife biology studying woodcocks. Personally, I've done a whole bunch of projects for rough grouse management woodcocks in northern New York. So, you know, I love this job. It's extremely interesting because you're always doing something different. And I'm obsessed with recreation too. I've done way more recreation than most foresters, and I put a high value on it. And I also believe, and especially on the Forest Service lands, that you know, integrating forestry with recreation programs is essential to show exactly what's going on the forest. Because you know, most people see a forest and you know it's a equilibrium, but you know, a forest ecosystem is completely dynamic. And recreation essentially is the public view of the ecosystem.
I can take it from the opposite side of the spectrum, not wanting to be a forester since I was 4 years old. I was going to say a key thing for me was to drop what I was doing. So I was at Warnell, to drop what I was doing in terms of jobs, which was culinary industry, and get something. You know, I know a lot of people do internships that are natural resource related. I decided to sign up to work at Fort Yargo, which is, 30-minute drive from Athens. And granted, it was a major pay deduction. I just did what I had to do. Sometimes you just got to sacrifice and do what you have to do. So to answer your question in terms of mobility, that was a huge thing too. So when I graduated, I signed up for the recent grad program, which I highly suggest to anybody. As long as you're in that 2-year time frame of having gotten your degree in natural resources, then you can apply and possibly get the job. But I didn't just put Georgia. I mean, obviously I wanted to work in Georgia, and fortunately enough for me, that's where I am now. But I basically put anywhere on the eastern half of the country. And they called me and were like, hey, we'd like to offer you a job in Mississippi. So I didn't know what they were going to offer me, and I was just like, and they gave me, I think, 1 hour or 2 hours to respond. And I was like driving home from Florida from a huge trip and stuff, and me and my fiance were like looking at each other like, I don't know what to do, Mississippi. And I just went with it. So we moved to Mississippi, Southwest Mississippi, for a year and a half, and then fortunately for me, it was kind of a weird situation. I'm not going to get into too much, but I was able to apply into the recent grad program again, and that's what got me here. So mobility is definitely key. You're definitely more likely to get a job with the Forest Service if you're willing to move. That's going to help your case a lot.
Yeah, and I think I think there's my history and how I got here, and I'll get to the mobility thing in a minute. But I flunked out of college twice before I got going on my right path, right? And I probably shouldn't say this at this time, but it wasn't until I found a passion in life and what I want to do that really kind of got me on the right path. As millions of people do, they go down the wrong path for a time, and I'm one of those. But I found a passion, and that was in watershed and fisheries and biology and that kind of realm. I took any job I could get, and worked my way through college as a seasonal employee with the U.S. Forest Service, with no guarantee of a permanent job. And I think, as Mike was talking about, as Greg was speaking about wanting to be a forester at 4 years old and 10 years old, you don't come out of college and already be a staff officer and a district civiculturist. It does take time, because there's a lot to learn. We all hope to get amazing educations coming out of college, but it does take a lot of that field experience and learning how to work with other people. There's a lot of team assignments in college, but it's a different ball game when you're working with people with backgrounds and jobs and passions that aren't just in your recreation course or your timber course. They're in working within the Forest Service and really learning how, getting that experience of working in those team environments, communicating. It wasn't until I got into the Forest Service that really I learned how to communicate with people who I didn't know. They were just peers. I may have a difficult and complex job, but it's managing people, it's managing expectations and emotions. And it takes a long time and a lot of experience to get there. Some people pick it up quick. If someone does have that passion to work in natural resources, whether it's the Forest Service, the Park Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Army Corps of Engineers has a lot of recreation programs. If you have that ability to be flexible with your family and other obligations, you got to get your foot in the door, and you got to gain that experience. and you can have a vision on where you want to be in life and where you want to end up in Georgia. I had no idea I was going to be in Georgia. I took a complete gamble coming here. And, um, and you do need to be willing to move around, but you don't have to. You make of it what you want, and it's all about gaining that experience and being in a place where you can have fun.
I would just like to add to that too. You touch on the people aspect. So I've heard a lot of people going into natural resources and saying, hey, I'm going to natural resource, so I have to deal with people. Well,
Yeah.
this is the most integrated you'll ever get with people. So just as an example, I've had people put a gun in my face as a forester before, and I've had people coming up and saying thank you for the work you do. But at the end of the day, no matter who you're dealing with, you have to be able to communicate with them, and at the end of and have a working discussion with them. And for an example, I've had truthfully a gun pointed in my face twice as a forester, because you're out in the woods and people get afraid. And how both of those instances ended. The one, I ended up having a soda with them in their camp, and they invited me back. And the other time, we ended up exchanging phone numbers, and they're friends still to this day. But you have to be able to take a situation, because you don't know what that person's going to be like or what their opinion is, and you have to be able to think on how they're perceiving what you're seeing, because everyone here sees everything different, from rec management to vegetation management to how the Forest Service should operate and what multiple use means. And it's a key aspect in anything you do in natural resources to make sure that you have that aspect now.
Just to be clear, it's not very often that we get guns. I've never had a gun pulled on my face, so maybe something about you, Greg.
It could be.
But not to scare off anybody.
It does happen that, as you say, that their life, you don't know what their life has been, their experience, prior knowledge, and educating the public is so important. I think it's one of the keys that our students have to learn is communication, and that's so vital, is what you said, Ryan, is being able to talk to people and approach it in a way that is so forceful, or that's not the right word, but it's makes them at ease. And how do you foster that in your staff? How do you help them learn that? Is it
from my own experience, and this is what I try to provide the freedom for my employees, and me personally, I had to find some humility in myself of being okay with not knowing everything, and finding those individuals. At the time it was my current supervisor, who to this day he's retired, but he's still a dear friend of mine, and a father figure to me still to this day, of finding that humility that I needed help, that I had questions, and open up that dialogue of wanting to learn and being okay with not knowing what you don't know. And so as me as a ranger, I'm a fish biologist by training. Anything in the water, I got it. Any amphibian or reptile, I got it. If it doesn't move, I'm clueless, right? I may be a district ranger for the Forest Service, but if you pick out 10 trees and ask me to identify them, I'll get a couple. But that's why I have these guys. And I'm not ashamed to say, what is that? Because at the end of the day, it's I need to be able to communicate with them, have the respect for their opinions, and they need to be okay with me not knowing everything. People expect the ranger to know everything, whether it's the public or my employees, and that's their problem, because I don't know everything. But you give me enough time and I'll figure it out. So I think humility in both in your career, sometimes having to take that that first step into a GS3, a GS4 forester or recreation tech, and you're managing a campground and picking up trash, and it's not the glorious thing. But if you work hard, you make yourself available to do other things, help out with timber, help out with fire, then you start to develop those relationships and you get that experience. And then, you know, next thing you know, the ranger's writing you a letter of recommendation to, hey, this girl, she will do anything we ask her to do, and she deserves a shot, and there's potential. And it's just having that drive and having humility and empathy.
Shifting gears a little bit, you talked about having to manage for multiple uses. What sort of constraints or barriers do you encounter on a daily, monthly, yearly basis that sort of get in the way of some of that?
Yeah, so you know, multiple use management. I mean, it's you know, that goes from resource extraction. You know, whether it's, we don't have a lot of mining here. We don't have any mining here. But out west, where I came from, you know, mining. You know, pit mines. You know, I mean, massive mines. You have grazing. You have timber management, timber sales, clear cuts. Recreate. I mean, so it spans the gamut of everything. And so multiple use management. It's we produce things for the American people and the world, and that is sometimes goes against even our own morals and ethics at times, and that's a hard thing that we have to deal with as individuals. But when you put on this badge, you're representing the agency and your position. You have to move forward. And so managing for multiple uses these days, the prior generation had it much easier. The public is highly more educated in what the issues are for ecosystem management. People understand what ecosystem management is. People understand watershed science and erosion and the impacts of sediment to you know, brook trout. And so you have a higher, I think, you have increased engagement from the public and desire for less management or very limited management and a focus on recreation. Fix the trails. Well, we don't have the funding to fix. We may not have the funding to fix the trails.
Right.
But you know what? If we can put together, if these guys can put together a forest restoration project that results in cutting of timber to support, you know, mills and infrastructure, local economies, some of that money that we get back from that in terms of receipts, we reinvest into those trails. We rebuild trails, we put in new bathrooms, we rebuild this road. And that's where some of that multiple use comes in. And it's that creativity that current authorities and laws and regulations that we work under provide us to, our funding's not going up. And so we have to be creative. And,
I would like to add too, so you know, when the National Environmental Policy Act was written in the 1960s, the public was your local community, and today our local community is the world. The information, every project we do isn't just looked at from our local partners and our neighbors. It's looked at from people in California, in Great Britain. I mean, anywhere you look. So you have a huge amount of collaboration with everything you do, and it works to benefit, and sometimes it also works to hinder, because it's essentially an information explosion. There's so much now, and it's so readily available, and word spreads so fast with the internet. NEPA has changed an aspect on public land management.
What are some parting words of wisdom that you all might have for folks that are considering employment within land management agencies? I know you've touched on a number of things about work experience and flexibility and mobility and whatnot, but are there any other things you might like to add to that as we wrap up?
I think if you do have this passion to work in land management or recreation and outdoors, I think it's important to understand you're doing it for the love of that. It brings you that joy. Um, it's not one where you can make good money. You can make a very decent living here. You can raise a great family under the salaries that we make, and I'm not complaining about that. There are other opportunities that I could do much better in life with the skills that I have. But I have a passion, and I think that is that's what drives me to work as much as I do. So find that passion on what you can do. Be flexible, be humble, and it takes a lot of hard work. It's just work.
Yeah, and I would add, don't limit yourself to that dream position. And with natural resource management, it doesn't matter what the title is. You're going to be integrated. If you're in recreation, you're going to deal with vegetation, and you're going to deal with fire, and you're going to deal with everything else. So you might end up taking one of those jobs and saying, I'm going to hate it. You might turn out you love it. And I can guarantee you it's going to help you get in that dream job in the future if you turn out it doesn't work out for you.
For me, I would say it's kind of cliche, but initiative is a big thing. There's going to be a lot of things that you have to do that you don't necessarily want to do to get where you want to be. Like, for example, walking up to Mr. Isler and asking him for a recommendation for my Forest Service application. It's a little intimidating because Isler is who he is, you know. So stuff like that. When I tried to get the job here, I had also applied for the Oconee position, same position on the Oconee National Forest. And it was a little more ideal for my wife's job location, so I went there and I spent about an hour talking to their TMA there, just to kind of like give them a face, give them a name, ask them questions. I didn't necessarily want to go in there and talk to them for an hour, but I did at the same time because I really wanted a job there. So sometimes you just got to push yourself to have the initiative to do things.
I think the final point on this, at least for me, is it was brought up earlier, was volunteering. We may not have a lot of jobs right now that we're filling, but volunteering, we have a large volunteer workforce, and the agency there's a large reliance on volunteers these days. Trail management is massive. We have a very active volunteer trail group. Volunteers who do the hemlock woolly adelgid treatment. There's a lot of volunteer opportunities, and we have hired numerous people who we know. We get their resume across, and I think, God, this guy or this girl's name sounds familiar. And I asked one of my staff, oh yeah, she's been volunteering with us for the past 5 years. She's a rock star. It's great to see her, you know. And so it allows us to get some experience and spend time outside, getting an understanding of what we do, why we do it, and what the purpose is, and try to see that big picture. And so that's a great way for people to get involved. And for that, you can reach out and contact any of the local offices that you're interested in working in. And if you're interested in working in recreation on trails, ask for the recreation staff officer or somebody in recreation to talk about volunteers, and we'll get you set up. We'll talk about what the opportunities are, timber, wildlife. We bring those folks in all the time, and that's a good way you can test drive where you want to maybe focus on.
Good. Well, Greg, Ryan, Mike, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it, and I hope the students can understand that the value of working for the Forest Service. If that's your passion, it's there. There's great value and great opportunity. So,
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
fellas.
Thank you.